your host today. I'm a DevOps and infrastructure engineer here in the Contact Center. And today, um, we are going to talk about how AI is reshaping front end and mobile app development. And I want to be sure that none of us on this call is new to what AI is currently doing, right? And how the landscape has evolved. And in fact, we need to know a new way of doing the whole stuff, right? We have a speaker here. Um, his name is Emmanuel Ogwo. He's an experienced software engineer, right? And I want to let you know that it's a privilege to be on a call where he's giving this speech, because after today, I want to be sure that after today, the way you think about building software, even your mobile app, your front end and everything will change, and it will change forever, right? So a lot of things have changed, and it's going to talk about how AI is reshaping front end. Some of us, they are front end engineers and mobile app developers and all that, right? Um, and some of us, they are DevOps engineer, and I want to believe that we all use AI in one way or the other to in building whatever we are building or running whatever we are running. So sit back, relax, have your pen, jot something down, right? We are going to attend to questions after the section. Jot down your questions. I want to believe that you must have a question to ask, right? Just jot down your questions. After the whole sections, you can come up with a question, right? Anything that you need clarification on. Speaker here will do justice to that. Thank you very much. And welcome, Emmanuel Ugo. It's a privilege to have you on the call today. I don't know if I pronounced your name very well. Sorry if I didn't. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, Samuel, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome.
All right.
Go on.
Okay, so we can go right into it, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. From this part, it's afternoon, so in case there's somebody else in a different time zone. So I'll just quickly share my screen. I think I'll need some confirmation if you can see my screen. Okay.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Again.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So like Samuel shared, I think AI is not it's not a concept that is new to most of us. One way or the other, we probably would have heard of it at some point. All right. And some of us even use it, if not in software development, it's going to be maybe in whatever we do. Some people even use it in things like drafting messages. Some people use it in drafting emails and things like that. So it's generally something that we can see in It's something that we can see generally in our daily lives. But the session today is focused on how it's reshaping front-end and mobile app development. I would go into why that is a group. Some of you might wonder why is like front end and mobile app development being merged together in this case. But we also know, I think hybrid mobile development is something that is very rampant or popular now. Before now, it used to be native apps. So, for example, for you to build iOS apps, you need to be familiar with Swift. For you to build Android apps, you need to write Java. But that's no longer the case because of the frameworks and the hybrid frameworks for mobile app we have now. As a front-end engineer with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you can build mobile app that you can deploy to iOS, you can deploy to Android, and they'll run fine using the native features like your camera notification and all those other things that used to be available just for native. Right. So some of the things we'll be looking at today is why does this matter? We've talked briefly about that. Why does this even matter? All right. Why are we discussing this topic now? Then we'll start with roadmap to becoming a modern front-end developer. That is important because on the call, I know we would have people at different levels. There are people who are just interested in getting into it. There are people who maybe have already started some things, even have some projects in their portfolio. So we'll look at the roadmaps for that. Then we'll look at what AI in front end and mobile development really means. What does it mean? I know what AI is when I'm performing a search. But what does AI mean in terms of development and also specifically in terms of front end and mobile development? Then there's also AI-driven work development workflow, which we'll be looking at. Then there's design to code automation. There's a full process where you can actually things like you have your you have your design, like your user interface that has been designed either with Figma or any of the design tools, and you can automatically convert them to code. We'll also be sharing some examples of tools that can be used for that. Then, importantly, prompt engineering, right? Because you can effectively or the the effectiveness of you applying AI in your software development at the point we are currently actually is dependent on prompt engineering. So it's very much dependent on how you can explain your intent to the AI, right? Because how clear you can explain it, how clear you can give it a prompt is what actually determines how well it would perform what you want it to perform. But interestingly, you can also use AI for that. So I would speak to it briefly because even the prompts. So of recent I've had to build front end with Lovable. Lovable is an app where you can give it prompts and it's going to build the interface for you and also the backend, interestingly, if you want that. So if you don't have your own backend service and you want to build um with Lovable, you can use your prompt. So interestingly, if you can have a conversation with ChatGPT, for example, on what you are trying to achieve, right? Because it's possible for you not to be able to explain that fully, but you can share your idea, maybe like walk through the idea with ChatGPT, and at the end you tell it to give you like a good prompt that you can give to Lovable. And once you do that, it gives you a prompt, and then you can use that. So even in the case of needing prompt to work effectively with AI, you can still use AI to help assist you come up with those prompts. Then we'll look at AI assisted testing and quality assurance. Then look at the core impact. What does this actually mean on developer role as it is currently? So again, why are we talking about this? Which is there's already an explosion of AI tools. Like we already see it in our everyday lives. It's no longer how do I put it? It's no longer, at this point, it's not even an experiment anymore. There's still experimentation going on how to use it, but it's already something that has come to stay. And because of that reality, there is an expectation in terms of productivity for developers, because we'd see that AI is more of is a very smart assistant that you can work with. It's like having a colleague or as a senior developer is like having sort of like a junior developer who is very smart and very knowledgeable on a lot of things and have access to a lot of data relating to programming. So because of that, once that is made available to you or once that is made accessible to you, which it has, there is a rising expectation of it. So you'd see things that typically you would take 2 weeks to do, you can put it into 2 days or things like that, right? Depending on what you want to accomplish. So there's that rising expectation, and whoever is not adopting that or using that probably would fall behind or not be able to compete in the software industry. Then there's also a shift from code to AI assisted workflows, which is something we'll take a look at. So before now, code. Well, now there's also you need to think about a lot of things, like I mentioned. Prompt engineering. You need to know those things. You need to also be able to articulate what you want to build as a software engineer. So I would start with the roadmap to becoming a modern front end engineer. Like I mentioned, I was going to start earlier. So there are some things that are essential, right? So depending on what level you are in, some of the things you have to already know about being a front-end developer, first of all, is how does the internet work, right? What is the internet? How does it work? Um, Things like hosting you might eventually come to this. How do browsers work? How do browsers interpret the programming languages, or when you build things, how is it compiled and all those things? So it's a base knowledge that is required, right? Understanding how these things work. Then the base for front-end development currently, front-end development currently, the base for that is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, HTML is important, CSS is important, and JavaScript comes in very handy, right? Also important in the development for front end. I think there are different analogies that people use to explain this. Some people would say HTML is the skeleton, so you use that to sort of like form the layout, the elements, and then how you want to stack it. So people refer to HTML like that. I think when I was learning software engineering in school now, there's an analogy that the HTML is like the skeleton and CSS is more like the skin, like the flesh or the clothes that gives it styling. Then JavaScript makes it if you want to add functionality or like make it dynamic, right? Make the layout you've done dynamic. Um, there's also there's also another analogy of HTML just being like the walls or layout, and then CSS is more like the interior design and things like that. But ultimately, HTML is a markup language. That's a standard markup language for creating web pages. That's how you structure the content how you want your contents, your elements, and your attributes generally. And browsers know how to interpret these tags. So something that is very common in HTML, the use of tags, right? um Almost everything you see rendering on your browser is like made up of tags, and the browser knows how to interpret those tags. Right, so it's something that is very the journey to becoming a front-end developer. Once you even understand how the internet works, HTML is something that you should pick up because it's a base requirement for it. And somebody might now argue that do I still need to know HTML, CSS, JavaScript when there is already AI? And now, like I explained earlier, AI comes in as an assistant or having a knowledgeable, very smart, experienced software developer who could do the things where instead of you writing the codes before it can do this. But ultimately, you need to understand what it's doing, right? You need to understand what it's doing. You need to be able to correct it because it's speaking of prompt, you have to be able to guide it or to nudge it in the direction that you want it to go. And because of that, for you to use AI well in front-end development or use it properly and efficiently, you still need to have the knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Because how would you review the codes? How would you correct what it needs to do? right? Sometimes when you see, if you're writing JavaScript and you're using AI and see things like error, you can actually tell you that there's an error, you should try to fix it, right? But having an understanding of what could even cause that error makes your prompt more direct, right, and more informed. So that knowledge is something that for now you would always need, right, to properly develop front end and user interface for applications. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is something you would strongly need, right, to do that implementation properly. All right. I already spoke of CSS styling. The full meaning there is cascading style sheets. And once you have your layout in HTML, CSS helps you. So, for example, you have buttons. Buttons is a HTML tag for buttons. So when you go to your website and you see button that says submit, right, or you see a link that you click on to take you somewhere, those things are HTML tags. Those are like the layout and the elements. But in terms of like maybe things like color, how do you decide what the color of your button is? Those things you need CSS for. All right. Also responsiveness. We like CSS is used to control those things. How you can visit the website and this is how it looks on desktop, but then you visit it on mobile and this is how it looks. You visit it on tablet and it looks different. All right, those things are controlled by CSS. So that knowledge is very, very important, right? And finally, JavaScript just makes it interactive. Talked about it being dynamic, right? So it's possible you want to change while there's a user on the website, you want to change what the content of a particular element is, right? Or if somebody clicks on a button, you want something to happen. So that interactiveness of your website is fully dependent on JavaScript, right? And we are talking about front end, but JavaScript is very is a versatile programming language. There's front end, there are multiple JavaScript frameworks, which would still take a look at some of them. But it's also back end, right? So, and that knowledge in a way is transferable. Like having an idea of that helps one way or the other. And because of also the introduction of AI, I think at some point anybody who is currently on the front end part would um, just eventually translate it to a full stack role because you have AI that can help you generate these front end. So having that knowledge is also something that is important. Then still on the roadmap to becoming a modern front end developer, the next thing is version control, right? Version control is so let me explain this. If you before now, how like software used to be built, things like so if you have your code base, you upload it to your hosting, for example, you have that there. If you make changes, for example, you copy the files and then you upload the changes for it to reflect and things like that. But version control helps you keep track of these things, all right? And that is what Git is. It's a very, very popular version control. Once you come into software development, for you to even be able to collaborate with one another, so you can work in a team where 7 people are working on the same project, all of you are working on the front end of the project. So keeping track of those things, keeping track of the code changes, allows version control allows that allows you and your colleagues or you and your team members to contribute and keep track of the changes, right? And there is GitLab, right? It's also once you have the knowledge of Git command, then it's applied in all these other platforms. So GitLab is a platform. GitHub is a platform. The I think GitHub is more popular than GitLab in terms of usage and community, right? But both of them work very fine. Um, because it's all layered on the version control Git, you can actually easily move, you can move your projects if you have to. I think of recent, we've had to move from, there's even Bitbucket, we've had to move from Bitbucket to GitHub, projects from GitLab to GitHub. So having the core understanding of the Git commands is something that you should have. So once you understand your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the next learning part you should pick up would be the version controls, right? So that you can collaborate with people, so that you can effectively track your code changes, right? And have other people collaborate on the project or on a project. Then there's package managers. All right. So again, one of the things that helps the software development community is that people make things available. So you don't always have to invent things, or you don't always have to build things, right? And in front end, these things would typically be packages. All right. So if you have, so think of things like maybe date pickers. You might not exactly have to build out date pickers yourself, right? Or carousels and all those things. Maybe you have, so there are multiple packages for these things, right? But being able to manage it is something that is made available in like through package managers that we have, right? If you can see my screen, you'd see that there's npm, there's yarn, there's pnpm, and then there's Bun, right? So those are different package managers, right, that you can use. And it's very important because when you're building just a static website, you can think of HTML, CSS, JavaScript being sufficient, which is also a very good starting point, right? Having that knowledge is a good starting point for building modern front-end applications. But eventually, on the long run, you would need to make use of packages, except you want to always build things out yourself, right? But there are a lot of packages, there are packages available, and you can tap into these things, right? Then coming down, there are frameworks, right? Coming down from once you understand the basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript, uh, version control, managing packages, then it's important to like learn a framework as actually as many you can get your hands on, and as many as you have time to dive into. It would be good to take a look at that. And beneath these frameworks is still the code that you are used to. What this just helps to do is to provide libraries and structure, right, or rules and tools generally that would make your building of software faster, right? And there are different features across different frameworks. So it's up to you to also decide once you have an idea of what you want to achieve, you can use any framework to build anything in most cases. But once you have a use case, a peculiar use case, it's important to review the use case and find what is advisable, or what is more suitable. I think that's the word. What is more suitable for what you want to build, right? We have examples here. There's React, there's Vue, there's Angular. Um, all those things are frameworks that are made available. And learning the framework is something that would learning the framework is something that comes in handy. That comes in handy, right? And also makes software development faster, because once you install a framework, usually there's this base thing you can. So for example, you don't always have to worry about things like routing, for example. Yeah. In fact, it comes by default. Most of them come default with the package manager that we looked at. They also have their own frameworks, or the like rules or structure. So they bring structure to your software development, or to your code base in this case. So these are different frameworks, front-end frameworks that you can review again. Some might be more suitable for what you want to do, depending on what you want. Same way, there's a framework, there's also CSS, there's also a framework for CSS. Then there are linters and formatters, right? What these help you do is it helps you format your code. So it improves the quality of your code. And also helps you in finding bugs. I think, we will be conversant with things like indentation. If you look into a code base that is not properly indented, you might have difficulty doing things like finding the closing div or the closing block of something, finding where a particular element was opened, and things like that. So linters and formatters help you, and you don't have to. So you can maybe write your code, and then there's a command on your keyboard to just clean it up or to format it. It also helps consistency and readability. Um, Also, when you are working with people, so we talked about version control earlier, right? Organizations or teams can use linters and formatters. Some of them are configurable. You can actually use it to decide the type of formatting you want, so that it's not a case of when you have a code and somebody pulls your code, right, and makes changes to them, and their own formatter is different from yours. It formats it and then adds changes even in places that they had not touched, right? So things like the type of indentation, those things are configurable in some formatters and some linters and formatters that you can use. So everything is consistent, everything is readable, and you don't have like formatting issues with indentations. And like I said again, it helps error detection, right? Then there's also testing. If we talk about testing, testing is also a part. Some people would argue that testing is not really the focus of a front-end developer because we have people who do quality assurance, so QA engineer, test ops engineers, right? But to ensure that your application is very stable, testing is also something that developers need to be involved in. So if you think of things like unit tests, the person who is responsible for the code is best suited to write the unit test, right? Because you are testing units of your code. And once you have these things in place, you even before you go ahead to deploy for maybe like a test ops engineer or a QA person, you would realize that if there are things that can be caught based on things like static analysis or unit tests. Right? Once you have those things in place, right? You will, once you have those things in place, it's easier for your code to be reviewed even before there's a test of engineer person who is taking a look at that, right? So, and there are different frameworks, we'll call them now, for testing. Also, AI plays a key part in this, right? Because uh, engineers should write tests, but it's not something a lot of people enjoy, especially front end. So if you want to write like front, you want to build your application, you want to write your code. Testing is not something you want to spend so much time on. A lot of people don't enjoy it. Again, this might be a personal opinion, but a lot of people don't enjoy it, which is something that AI can also do, right? So you can you can build your software and delegate for the AI to write unit tests. All right. You can also even ask it to factor in when it's generating your front-end code. You can ask it to factor in testability. All right, because it's possible to actually write a code, or especially possible to build software that is not testable, so it's not broken into units. For you to be able to write unit tests, you actually need to have units. So if everything is just a dump of your code, then that software or that code is not testable, which eventually is an issue. So these are some of the things that when you are writing code initially, it's easy to miss, especially maybe at entry level, at junior level, when you are starting out. But AI also helps you to factor that in. So you can actually have your code and use a prompt to say, make this code testable, or use factory pattern for this, things like that generally, right? Just to help the code become testable. But again, like I said, you need to have an understanding of this, because you can't guide the AI, you can't nudge it in the direction you want if you don't have like the core knowledge of it, or like the base knowledge that's required of it, right? So yes. Then the other things, there's cost, still battle the cost issue yesterday. So there are other things like cost, those are things to pay attention to that would also eventually be encountered in the journey to building or to becoming a modern front end developer. So that's it. There's still more. This is intermediate, so there's actually advanced and other things, but it's a roadmap that can be assessed on the URL that is on the slide. Right. Now we'll go to the other parts, which is what does AI, what does AI actually mean? Like I said, what is AI in front-end and mobile development? Like what does it actually mean? So there is LLM powered coding, okay? So which is large language models powered coding. There's also intelligent UI generation. talked about earlier, where you can actually have, if you have a design, you can actually have prompts to generate the UI for that, right? And if you don't even have a design, you can actually explain, depending on how much you can explain what you want to do. You can actually write commands and those things like that, the AI will generate the user interface, which is the core of what front-end development is, right? Building interfaces. So if you are able to explain what you want properly in prompt, which is prompt engineering, I think there's a section of this session that talks about prompt engineering, because it's something that is very important if you want to effectively use AI in front end and development, software development generally, right? So in this case, if you can clearly communicate what you want to build, if you have a design, you can use that. But if you can explain what you want to build. In fact, there's also a step further where you can actually use audio, like you can use text to explain what you want and have like the AI generate the user interface for you. And then you can review, you can make corrections, you can also use the prompts to make corrections to it, right? There's also predictive and adaptive user experiences. So the application itself can personalize the content people see in real time based on like AI integration that you have in your application. Then there's automated testing and debugging. I already talked briefly about this when I was talking about generating tests, also debugging. You can see errors in your code and actually use prompts to tell it like there's an error in this file. Can you take a look at this? So those are the things generally that AI would do in front-end development. All right. And there's also speaking to AI-driven development workflow. So AI would typically start from or software development front end majorly would include things like your UI UX. But for you to even get your UI UX, you probably need to get requirements and then UI UX design. Then there's also design to code automation. Then there's also coding with assistance. So I mentioned earlier that there are AI tools you can actually use to get your requirements. Right. I don't think it's a core focus for us on this call, but if you have like if you have a product manager, if you've worked or if you're working with a product manager, typically they would have requirements and then you can also convert these things to your own requirements, right? So if you want to build, let's say, a company website now, if you want to build an application for maybe like gym registration or something like that, there are requirements. There are a couple of pages you need. Or if you want to, in fact, let's make it simpler or bring it home. If you want to build your portfolio as a front-end developer, if you want to build your portfolio website, you want a landing page, you might want a portfolio section, you might want maybe reviews, people who have given you reviews. So those things are requirements, right? So you can actually still use AI to get these requirements, right? Based off what you want. When you have this, you can still use AI to translate this into user interface and user experience. All right. Once you have this design, or once a design is also provided to you, there are tools that you can actually use to convert that design exactly into code. So you can say, this is this design, can you generate this? In fact, there are things like you can actually take screenshots. You can take screenshots online of maybe like a web page of your design and upload to ChatGPT, for example, and have it generate what that code would look like. And I think it's underrated how much impact this has on the speed of delivery. So if you are trying to build these things out yourself, and there's somebody else who is using this tool which you are not using, the difference would be very much a lot. It's not I don't even think it's a X2 X3 difference. It's going to be a significant difference in people who use these tools, or any software engineer who is using this tool against anybody who is not, right? So and apart from the design to code, so this is now fully providing a design and having it build out that software. There's also coding with AI assistant. So this one, it's you would have things like You'd have things like auto complete, right? You'd have things like it suggesting architectural patterns or the way like ways you'd write your code. So these ones are usually embedded in your IDE. So whatever tool you use to write your code as a front-end engineer, some of these tools are available. I currently use Copilot um, a lot. And if you have Copilot embedded in your IDE, it's almost like having a companion while you are writing the code, right? Sometimes you are typing something and then it's suggesting ways it can auto-complete it, and it's left to you, right, to determine if you want to accept that, right? Or if you don't want to. There's also usually like a chat experience in your IDE, right? And it's very important for it to be in your IDE. And I would explain that briefly because it's also one of the ways to AI is reshaping front-end mobile development. And this is, you know, AI deals with context a lot, right? So if you give it enough context, then it would be able to work more effectively. So the AI tools that are embedded in your IDE, what it does is it gives you context, it gives the AI context to your application or to your code base entirely, right? So you have things like if you have reusable classes, if you have reusable classes defined maybe in other files, right, and you're working in a new file, because it's embedded into your code base and it has context into your code base, it will understand or it can understand this and make use of those classes, right? If you have maybe functions, front-end functions that you have defined in different places, when you tell it to do something, it can still reuse that instead of rewriting the code afresh. Right. So it's very important as much as you can, the ones embedded in your ID is recommended, and those are like the coding assistant. But like I said, you'd have to review some of the things it does, especially at this level, because there are some things that there's there's a place for a code being functional or a code working, but there's also a place for a code being secured. It factors these things in, but you have to have this particular you have to have this particular understanding or knowledge to be able to guide it when the need comes, right? So that's AI-driven development workflow in the different workflow for development, requirements, UI, UX, transforming your design to code, and also even while doing the code yourself, you can have it embedded in your IDE as a coding assistant, right? There is design to code automation, and so there are tools, right? There are tools like the Figma AI, right? Um, Galactica, there are various plugins, if you think of them, that helps you convert when you have like Figma designs. These things help you convert them to React or Flutter. Earlier, when we're looking at the different front-end frameworks available on the roadmap, you'd see that one of the framework was React. So you can have your designs converted directly to React and Flutter code. You can also have your wireframes. Wireframes in this case is you might not even have uh, knowledge of design, but you can sketch something out. So you don't exactly know how to use Figma, but you can sketch something out. So those things can be converted to UI sprint skeletons. Your sketches also can be converted to like component blueprints, right? And you can also have like colors and style guides that would be converted to like a CSS framework, right? And the core of this, the impact of this is that the pipeline between like design and development, right? There are now fewer things. So if you again, because it's machine, right? It's easy for you to pick these things, right? So there are things that the eye might miss, but if you have this provided or into your tool, like the AI tool you are using, then there would be less mismatch between these things, right? And what you now focus on is maybe logic and UX rather than bothering about pixel perfect implementation or replicating it exactly how it is on the design. I know there's usually a thing or there's usually a running joke of people saying when the designer or the UI UX designer does this, right? And then once the front end is done implementing, it looks different, or it's not exactly what. Or sometimes they do things where there's a difficulty implementing. So these are some of the burdens that AI tools, if properly used, actually takes off the software developers back, and you now focus on like the logic. Even with that, it can also assist you. That's where the code assistant comes in. Even with that, it can assist you with logic and user experience rather than bothering about things like ensuring the colors are right, the elements are positioned properly, right? There are some examples I have here because I know as a result of this conversation or this session, there are people who would want to try out different tools, right? So I already mentioned that there are tools that you can give things, right? And then those tools would actually give you output that you need, like the code that you need. Right, so there's Anima. The input here is Figma, Sketch, and Adobe XD. So you can export the things you have, all right, and then input, like provide the tool with that, and then you get an output. So in this case, you can either get your React, Vue, HTML, CSS, Tailwind, right? You can get those output out of this. Right. The second one is Locify AI. So again, you give it Figma and Sketch. So Figma is something that I think if you in the design community, Figma is very popular. It's very much adopted. So you see that most of these tools actually support Figma inputs. And when you give it Figma inputs, you can get what you as a software developer now understand, which is things like HTML, CSS, your React code, right? There's Supernova. Supernova is that one also helps with Swift UI and React Native. So you can give it your design and have it output Flutter, Swift UI, or React Native for you. Then there's also Swift UI Inspector. This one is actually not a tool on its own. It's something you can use in Figma. So in Figma, you can actually have it. It's a plugin in Figma that you can use to now output the Swift UI code that you want or that you need based on what you are building, right? Coding with AI assistants. I already talked about when you are coding with assistants. There are things like auto completion. So as you are typing, you could actually be doing like your normal the way you would normally type, but you see suggestions in your IDE that you can just press tab to accept, or depending on what the experience of the UI of the AI tool is, and then you can accept that. There's also refactoring, right? I already talked about how it's possible to write a code that functions but it's not exactly clean, or you are writing code that just reuses things. So maybe you define a function to do something, or you have even components, right? So you can think of if you have your buttons now, there's an approach where you just create your buttons everywhere. There's another approach where you want to define a button as a component, and you can go ahead and use this button everywhere that you want to use it. So those things, if you are coding with AI assistant, these are some of the suggestions that it would give you. There's also pattern recognition for cleaner architecture. I already talked of reusable component generation, and interestingly, this is done from natural language descriptions. So you can actually explain, like you can write in plain English or whatever language you're using. Again, I also mentioned even audio. Some of these tools support voice commands, like so you can tell it what to do, right? And it can understand this and generate these components into what you understand, right? Which is code. Okay. But again, they are still currently heavily dependent on your guidance. So it's something that we should always have at the back of our mind. So if you're even using things like Copilot at the moment, there is a lazy part of saying just give it the command and go and rest or go and do something else while it's doing that. But there's also a part of following its train of thought so that you can guide it, so that you can provide context, and most importantly, so that you can also review what it's doing. So the best results you get is usually from collaborating, doing sort of like a peer coding collaboration with the AI assistants that you have. You don't just leave it to do everything without monitoring it or without providing guidance and context. And it being in your code base, it having access to your code base entirely is also context, like I mentioned. Then there's accessibility, right? There are different things. Speaking of testing, accessibility is something that maybe by default people don't factor into what they are building, right? So if there's somebody with visual impairment, for example, are they able to use what you are building? Are they able to use the product you've built? Right? The user interface you've built, are they able to navigate through it easily, right? Um, some of these things you might miss, some of these things you might not pay attention to it, but um that's where the AI assistants come in play, right? So you can even build what you want to build and have it review it for accessibility improvements, right? You would say things like, can somebody navigate through your website without, or navigate through the core functionalities of your website you've built without a trackpad, for example? Can they use keyboards to just navigate throughout or things like that? So those are things that usually come in as accessibility improvements. And if you have AI assistants in your IDE, these things help, right? And when I say it helps, it's something that even while you are not thinking about it, the AI assistant is factoring that in. Or you can also prompt it to factor that into what it has done, right? And this makes what you build more accessible for everyone, right? There's also AI aided code reviews. So currently in your if you're using Git, you can add Copilot. If you have access to Copilot on GitHub, you can add it as a reviewer of your code, and then it gives its comments and suggestions. And in some cases, based on the rules you even define, you can exactly deploy that code or have that code run without attending to those comments, even if it's a case of ignoring it, but you have to attend to those comments. So AI aided code review is something that comes in very, very, very handy. Now, I talked about prompt engineering for developers, right? Because this is the whole backbone of using AI in software development. You need to be able to write clearly. You need to be able to communicate clearly what you want the AI to do, right? So what this means is writing prompts that generate consistent UI components, all right? So there's now a part of creativity, architecture, and system thinking, right? As a developer, you must learn to communicate with AI effectively. Prompt engineering helps create consistent, high-quality outputs. These include style constraints, component guideline, architecture instructions, and reusable templates. So this is not it's not an arguable skill, right? It's something that you have to develop if you are going to be using AI. But it also gets better, right? The more you do it, the better you get at it, right? But again, like I mentioned, even in the prompt engineering, there are also AI tools you can use to help you have better prompts. All right. So maybe if you want to build, still going back to the example, maybe if you want to build the portfolio website we mentioned earlier, you might not be able to articulate exactly what you want. Maybe you have an idea, but you can maybe spend 2-3 minutes having a conversation with, for example, ChatGPT, to give you a prompt that you can give to your coding assistant, to Copilot, for example, or to Lovable, like I mentioned. And then it gives you this prompt. But it's something that developers need to, is a skill that developers need to learn, is a skill that developers need to pay attention to, because that is it's a core backbone to it. Right. um I don't know how to emphasize more on this, but this is what would make developer A quality of code. Both of us have access to Copilot. Both of us have access to the same coding assistant. But when developer A is done using it, the output might be different from developer B because the input is your prompt, right? It deals with context, guidance, even the guidance you are providing for the AI is also through prompt. So prompt engineering is something that everybody should add to the skill, right? Because it's also now a software development with AI. It's also now a skill required for AI assisted software development, right? The other thing talked about architecture. So you also need to, because you can just tell it to say, you can give an example now, you can just say build out a, you can just say build out a page and then it builds out the page. But if you also have knowledge of architecture, even you can think through things like maybe folder structure, for example. So there's somebody who decides to build and then they put their landing page and everything in the same place. But then another person is writing the prompt, but then considering to say, put this in this folder, categorize these files in this manner. And then when you see that type of code base is easier to maintain, right? And also to collaborate with people on. So prompt engineering, if nothing is taken from this session, prompt engineering is something that you almost cannot effectively use AI in your software development journey without being able to communicate effectively with the AI. And the backbone of that communication currently is prompt engineering, right? Then testing and quality assurance, which I mentioned. There's unit test generation. There's also regression test scripts, just to ensure that what you've done does not break something else or making use of like altering this component does not affect its usage in another component. You can also check visual UI differences. So you can actually compare what you've built with maybe a design, right? There's also bug prediction using code analysis. So sometimes when you run your code, you see a problem, right? But if you also have AI assisted testing integrated, some of these things can be predicted, right? There's common one currently, static analysis. So if you have static analysis in your code base, you might just see that this might break, right? But if you also have AI integrated, which is also a form of it, it can predict like bugs or issues that would arise just by analyzing your code, right? So the core of this is developers' roles are evolving. It's not disappearing, right? Which I think is a concern a lot of people had earlier on. It's not disappearing, but the roles are evolving, right? Like I mentioned. So before now, the software developer core assignment was just writing code with generators of code, right? But now it's transforming or it's evolving into something else. We still do things like review code, understand code itself, right? But you need to also acquire skills before now that you could be competitive just by being able to write code. But now you have to think of system designs, all right. You have to think of integrations and architecture. You have to think of problem solving, right? In a case where if you understand the problem and you have an idea of how to solve that, then that also influences your prompt or how you approach it. Then ultimately we become supervisors of AI generated software, like I mentioned. So even though you are a junior developer, even though you are an intern, you also have an AI. Right? You also have an assistant. So automatically you have to put it this way, you have somebody or something in this case reporting to you, right? So one way or the other, you need to have that skill of being able to supervise, or being able to review code, understand things that are not ideal or things that are ideal ways to do things in software development. So that's a core, or those are like the core ways that the developer roles currently are evolving. But it's important to pay attention to the roadmap that was shared earlier, right? At the beginning of the call, we had taken a look at so those things are still important, right? Those things are important. It's good to have the knowledge, or is necessary to have the knowledge HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? Because how would you supervise an AI generated code if you don't understand what it generated? So it's just now you don't have to write those codes yourself, but there's something that generates it. You don't have to build out those UI yourself because there's something that generates it. But once it's generated, you need to be able to review. You need to be able to supervise while it's also generating. So I think that's a core way the industry is currently being reshaped by AI and the availability of intelligent assistants. So I think that's it from my end. Uh, I'll take questions now and answers or thoughts in general. So it might not be a question, but just your thoughts in general. I don't know if we can go to that now, Samuel, or if there's anything to chip in between that.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. You done so well. Um, I would like to ask one question. I think you spoken about what front end is about, and the future of front end basically, and what developers will do to build development processes and all that, and how AI is changing the game as well. Um, Front end, as we know, previously you before going into front end or going into front end, the roadmap is you learn HTML, you learn CSS, you learn JavaScript, and then before you start picking one framework or the other. Now, AI is doing something in that realm, right? Like we can use AI to give us a particular uh, maybe functionality, UI, and all that. So, is it still advisable for anybody going into front end to start learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and all that? Or is there a um, particular skill they need to learn instead, or a particular aspect of front end, or a particular thing they need to learn in HTML or CSS to start building application as at today, so that we have where human comes in and where AI plays in order to develop your application fast.
Okay. All right. So I would speak to that. So like you said, right? Earlier when we're looking at the roadmap, you start with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Before it's like that's on the journey to front end development, right? Now, those skills are still necessary, very much necessary, even with the availability of AI, right? But like I said, your role evolves from somebody who writes this code majorly to somebody who gives prompts for these codes to be written and ultimately supervise, right? So if you don't know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, when the AI, which is now what generates the code. So again, you are knowing it not exactly to write it. It's you being able to write it and also being able to review it. Because the core function, the core part or the core assistance AI does here is to generate. Like so it's going to generate that code. So for example, if I say, um, can you build out a page to have like a banner at the top, a button to the left, then a contact form at the bottom. The output of that, so I've given it an input of a prompt. The output of that is most likely going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The example I just gave might not need the JavaScript, but let's say when you click on the button, let the modal comes up where you can fill or something, right? So the output is going to still be code, right? And if you cannot properly review the code or suggest changes to it by understanding the code, you would still be limited. right? You'd still be limited. So it's still important. It's very much important. The availability of AI does not mean as a front-end engineer, you should not understand HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, because you need to be able to read and understand what the AI is generating and also be able to correct if need be or guide if need be. So yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the answer. Do we have questions from anybody? All right. Chukwunyelu Kingsley Manuel, can we have your question?
Um, Good afternoon, sir. Everyone. Can you hear me?
Good
Can anybody
afternoon.
hear me?
Yes, okay.
I'm very happy that we're actually having this AI class or meeting, because when I was studying JavaScript and HTML, I started from one school like that, but I didn't understand what the school was actually like teaching, because the person teaching this something was not even teaching it very well. So I entered another school again, and they were just teaching it somehow, and I wasn't getting it clear until I finally decided that I'm not going to use any human being again. I will start using ChatGPT to study everything. So I started using ChatGPT to study everything: HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and in fact, it was very, very great, because it was explaining it in child like in normal to the lowest level that anybody can understand. So, but when I finished JavaScript very, very well, so I now told someone that, because someone asked me, like a mentor, like how am I able to learn coding, and I know it very well. I was not telling him, oh, that I didn't study in school, because I I used ChatGPT to study everything. So he now told me that that you stop it, that is not good. That anybody that I tell that I use ChatGPT to learn coding, that the person they will not accept me, and it's not good. That I should go back to school again and go and learn it from human being, normal, before I can be able to become a good coder. So I now went back to UDME, because I already understand everything. So I now study again UDME everything before I now apply to BIMCOM. So my question now is it good for somebody like you want to start learning coding just like I did, to use AI like ChatGPT to not just to generate code, but to study, like full study, because it gives you practice questions, you solve it by yourself. It's really like a full-time teacher, and he knows everything you need. So is it good to start with AI, or is it good to first go to school, then you can now be generating, or it's okay to use AI to study coding or studying front end? So that's just my question. So that in case I see somebody that is learning, I can know how to direct the person if the person is not understanding from any school. So that was what I want to ask.
Okay. Yes. So it's okay to do that. But I would explain some of the things to consider before you do that. So learning generally is actually, like you mentioned, is actually research. Like, it's you consuming resources that are available. All right. And you now acting, so exercises, for example. So if you go to a school, typically what would happen is you have somebody who is teaching, but there is also resources that you use. So maybe um PDFs that you read through, right? Or online resources. It could be like a blog post, generally those things. So learning is you consuming resources and then taking out exercises based on that. These things are things that, like the AI tools you have, case in point, ChatGPT you just mentioned, can do for you. I think, making reference to what you said, I still asked the question yesterday, and then it was asking, like it was giving it gave a response and said, would you like this response to would you like it explained to you like a 10-year-old, or would you like a core deep dive, like a technical architecture deep dive into it? So the AI is able to do this, but there is also a need for you to be able to carry out the research, right, on your own, right? So it has the resources. If you think of the resources that AI has access to, is actually a combination of multiple schools. All right. So you can use it, but it doesn't erase the need for like a school itself or a teacher in this case, or maybe like an institution or a body. Because what that also helps to do is one is collaboration, but then there's also guidance. So like I mentioned, if you know how to carry out a proper research, then because the resources are made available, right, you can do that yourself, right? But if you don't know how to do that, ideally, or even when you've done that, you can still check out institutions. I know, for example, there's the Bincom Academy. I don't know if that would be spoken about, but so you also have access to those things where somebody is actually guiding you, right, on maybe the change in what you are doing, or also exercises and keeping you accountable for it. All right. So those are some of like the perks that the institutions add. Also, there are also things like I know in if you have a good portfolio that works, but there are also things like maybe people might look for a sign of or like an evidence that you've done what you've done, right? So in the case, if you are saying you've learned, maybe somebody would have to give you, or you'd have to provide maybe a certificate of completion or something, or if you have a portfolio, that's also fine, right? But these are some of the perks that institutions give. So I think it's a case of them complementing one another. There are people who are self-taught, like they are self-taught engineers, and all they have access to were the resources online, which is basically what AI consolidates in a particular place for you. So yes, you can do that, but there's also a part of supporting that with an institution. So yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I understand. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for the question. Marvin, I think your hand is raised.
Wow, okay. Thank you so much for everything. It was very, very wonderful and well explained. You mentioned that you can take a Figma design and give it to an AI and then get your code generated from that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I am not proficient in Figma. And so what I also found out is that you can actually take your documentation, give it to, let's say, you want to make a mobile app or something, give it to an AI like Gemini, and ask to generate the designs for you or of what the app might look like. And then take those pics and give it to, let's say, uh, anti-gravity or some or kilo code or any other AI, and then they will also generate the code for you. So I don't know if you mentioned that. I just thought I should add it too. Thank you.
All right. Yes. Thank you very much for that. So yes, like you mentioned, it looks like when we say Figma to code, it looks like you also need to understand Figma. But like you've added, which is very correct. You can even once you have the idea, you can work your way backwards with the different AI tool across the development. So from UI, from even building out the UI UX, you can also use AI tools to do that up until the implementation. So yeah, thank you for that. Do we have any other question? Yes, Izuchukwu.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. So the question I have today on where you talk about shifting from code-centric to AI. So I want to know, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so shifting from code-centric to AI automation. So uh, most time I'm in DevOps and infrastructure and DevOps team. So their
Okay.
experience would I normally have while using AI to generate code. So I discovered that AI doesn't give us the perfect uh, code like script. We want to generate script. Sometimes we will need to go through the script and be able to, do some corrections and to arrange it so that it can be able to give us the exact thing that we want. So now I want to know, is it good to learn coding from AI without undergoing through human teaching? Because from the experience I have, AI cannot, it's not giving the exact thing that except you use your own human knowledge and go through it and fix it in a way it should be before you can be able to use it in deploying anything you want to do. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so I would speak to it, but I would also clarify something. There's a part of learning coding from AI. There's now also a part of generating code with AI. Right. So those are two different, like you mentioned, which is something I've talked briefly during the session, is for you to be able to guide the AI properly, you need to know how to. So there's another part of you learning how to code or learning how to write script, or for example, with AI. And what that would typically do is providing you sources that you need, not exactly generating the script. So if I say, so again, you use DevOps. So if you want to generate like if you have like CI/CD script, for example, there's now a part where you actually have AI generate. So that's generating the code. But there's also a part where you can say, how would you do this? And then it gives you multiple resources that you can use to learn how to do that. And it's very important to know how to do it, because if you don't know how to do it, whatever is generated to you, you will not be able to tell, because you're able to tell that the script was not correct because you already like you are now working in that field. It's good to acquire the knowledge, but again, acquiring the knowledge can be done through AI, which is very different from it generating the code. So if you want to learn scripting, for example, like you mentioned, you would not just say you would not just go to the AI and say generate a script to do this. That's not most likely what will happen, right? You would go to it with the plan that let it provide you resources you need to learn that, right? And based off that resources, you can also now supervise the generating aspect or activity that the AI also does. Izuchukwu, so to answer your question more clearly, the learning part, you can learn with AI, but learning is like that learning it is a requirement for you to be able to use it in terms of generating. So yeah. I don't know if that clarifies your question.
Okay, yes, thank you.
All right. Okay. Does anybody have any other question?
Any other question? All right. If there's no further questions, thank you everyone for joining today. Thank you, Emmanuel. It's a privilege to have you here today, and I've also learned a whole lot from your presentation as well, and also learned from the question as well. And for every one of you that joined today, I want to say Thank you for joining. We'll have this again in another quarter, and let's look forward to having Emmanuel again in our next community event. Thank you, and have a beautiful day. All right. Bye for now.